Hey, what's up? It's Cobeau, and you're now in part 2 of the 2-track vocal mixing series. In the last video, I went over how to create space for your vocals in a 2-track beat. And in this one, I'm going to be going over how to get your vocals to sit properly in the mix. So if you haven't seen that last video, check it out over here, and then come back. Come back to this one. Keyword, come back. Boom, boom. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say that I don't. Once again, for this session, I'm using my instrumental cover of Nelly Furtado's Say It Right, the Tame Impala version that they did on BBC a while ago. And the vocalist for the session is Mohv, so definitely check her out. When trying to get your vocals to sit in the mix, there are a few key things that you could look at or add to your processing chain to get your vocals to sit where you want them to be. So before we get into the effects, I want to address something to keep in mind when mixing in general. The first thing being is that mixing is all about problem solving. You don't need paid plugins or more gear to make your mix sound good. As long as you have a good idea of what each tool in your toolbox does and how to use it, you should be able to get a quality mix. Also, to kind of piggyback off of that, it's important to have an intention behind each decision that you make when mixing. So for example, for this session, a lot, or at least the instrumental, is very bottom heavy, meaning that there's a lot of low end, a lot of low or mid lows, low mids, mid lows. There are a lot of low mid frequencies. And so to get the vocal to cut through, I want it to be, or have a more airy feeling, have it take up more of the high frequency range. So that's like an intention that I'm going to have throughout my mixing process. All right, so with that said, let's get into the tips. The first tip for some of you may be all you need, honestly, because I find that it's either overlooked or forgotten completely, and that is just to reference the beat when adding effects. It's that simple. So don't just solo your vocal and then add all these effects to it and then expect your vocal to sound amazing. You didn't have any kind of reference to the beat which you're trying to mix into, so that's probably why it doesn't sound quite right, or it sounds too like it doesn't sit properly, you know? So mixing is all about balance, and if you have too much or too little of one effect or one thing, it's not going to sound right. So definitely reference the beat to make sure that everything is balanced. And basically this tip is going to be just goes with everything, that all the other tips. So just make sure you keep doing this. Don't just solo the vocal. Do it. Reference. Tip 2. Using EQ creatively to sculpt your vocal sound. Like I said earlier, I want these vocals to be bright, so I want to use my EQ to make the vocals seem brighter. I personally like to separate my surgical or normal EQ from my creative EQ, but there are cases where I do use one EQ to achieve both. Right here, I have an extremely rough EQ, like so much going on, guys, like wow, so technical, wow. But yeah, it's just for the sake of the video that it's so minimal, but I'm just taking out the unnecessary lows with this high pass filter over here. And to make the vocal seem brighter, I'm taking out some of these lower mids over here. And honestly, I like taking out a bit of these lower mids pre-compression, just because I feel that it makes the vocal seem cleaner and clearer. And to some it may seem like the vocal sounds thin when you do this, but I honestly don't think it's going to be too much of, it isn't much of a problem, because when you add compression down the line, it adds that, you get that weight back. So that's just something I like to do. So let's see how that sounds. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can. So there you could definitely hear that taking out a little bit of those lower mids definitely helps clear up a lot of that like boominess in the vocal. It's not that boomy, but like when you hear it with the compressor next, you'll hear what I mean. So let's just add the compressor after so you could see what this does. I can say that I don't
love the light in the dark. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark.
All right, the next tip we have is using a multi-band compressor. So similarly to how we used an EQ to shape our vocal, we can use a multi-band compressor. To keep things simple, I'm going to use this multi-band compressor preset called Vocal Control. And these are the things I changed. I changed the high split frequency to 2 kilohertz, just so I can control more of the highs. I adjusted the thresholds of each of the bands, and I normally go from lowest to highest, and each band has roughly like -3 dB of gain reduction, depending on what I want to do. And then from there, it's time to shape the vocal using these output knobs. Again, I want these vocals to be bright, so I'm going to adjust these with that in mind. So I took out a lot of the lows, a little bit of the mids, and boosted some of the highs to get more crisp feeling. So let's hear how that sounds.
I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark.
On to the next tip, using delay to add width and depth and space. Width is very important to getting your vocals to sit properly in a mix, because when you get it right, it makes your vocals seem upfront and full. And if you put too little or too much of it, that can cause your vocal to seem a little bit out of place. So this is why it's very important to reference your beat. In terms of using delay to get width, you can use a slap delay. So I'm going to use a slap back preset over here, and what I changed is that I unlinked the channels, changed the delay mode to time on both channels, and I have the time set to around 70 on one ear and about 65 on the other ear. Having the time set to anywhere between 50 to 80 milliseconds is good for slapback delays. If you go any lower than 50 milliseconds, then it becomes more of a chorus effect. And the main difference between the two is that the chorus effect will have a tighter feeling, while the slapback delay will have this kind of looser feeling. So let's hear how this sounds.
I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say.
Honestly, when I was first making this vocal chain, I didn't even really have this, so I'm probably gonna have this off for the rest of the video. But yeah, sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. More of the story. Forgot. So as you can see, there's not a lot of this slapback effect in general on this vocal. So something I like to do to more subtle effects like this with delay and reverb is add a compressor after. And this is just literally the generic compressor preset over here. Nothing too fancy about it. But I like doing this because not only does it bring out the details, but it keeps the mix cleaner, because now you don't have to lather on all this reverb and delay, although we know we love them so much. It's going to muddy up the mix if we have too much, so this helps keep the mix clean. So let's hear what it sounds with and without.
I can say that I don't love the light in the dark.
And then in context.
I can say that I don't love the light in the dark.
For width, you can also use none other than the good old Haas effect. You knew it was coming. I don't know what you think this was. If you don't know about the Haas effect, girl. But basically what the Haas effect does is that it gives the listener the perception of width, because one of the ears or channels is slightly delayed. So over here, I have this delay set up, and both the left and right channels are set to time. And you can see that the right channel is delayed by 5 milliseconds. So let's hear what this is doing. First, here we go.
I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark.
So there, it makes the vocal seem a little bit more full and more upfront and wide. So that's effect. The next tip is using reverb to add space and depth and width. It's important to add space and depth to a vocal because we don't speak or hear in a vacuum. Although technically space is a vacuum, so I was like, what's up with that? When we hear things relative to the space around us. So trying to find a reverb that fits with the beat is very important. I have a few different reverbs that I'm using on this vocal. The first one is this ambient medium preset that I'm using. I wanted an effect that kind of felt like you were in a closed room, a very small room. And so the main things I changed were the decay time and the size. I changed this to 300 milliseconds and this to literally the lowest it can go, 0.22. I also believe I changed the pre-delay to the lowest setting and then I added a high cut and took off the chorus. And so this is how it sounds. Oh, and again, I'm going to leave this compressor on after just so you can hear the effect a little bit more. But just know that there's a compressor after this.
I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark.
So for me, this kind of gives it a kind of lift in terms of presence, and that's something that I liked a little bit more than the slap delay, so that's why I used this over the slap delay. All right, so now for the final reverbs, I have a plate and a long chorus reverb. I don't know why I'm looking like I'm trying to fight. Like I'm not trying to fight. So for my final reverbs, I have this plate reverb over here and this long space chorus reverb over here. And my thought process behind this was that plate reverbs tend to be a bit brighter, and again, that's something that I was going for with this vocal. And I have the long space chorus reverb there because I wanted the drama of a long reverb, and I liked how the chorus effect was modulating all the sounds together. So don't be afraid to experiment and stack reverbs because it definitely creates interesting spaces. Like this music doesn't necessarily have to imitate the real world sounds. Like you can create your own spaces by stacking reverb. So definitely experiment with them and reference. We said this, we went over this. Reference with the beat. All right, let's hear how this sounds together.
I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say that I don't love the light in the dark. I can say.
All right, so those are my tips, those are my tricks. If you have a question, leave a comment below. Hit me up on IG and like and sub. That's it. All right, peace. That's a plane.